Welcome back to Dark Confession. Some secrets should have stayed buried. In May 1999, Hong Kong police entered a small apartment after receiving a disturbing tip. What they discovered inside would shock the city and eventually become one of the most infamous criminal cases in its history, hidden. Inside a Hello Kitty doll were human remains, but that discovery was only the beginning. The investigation would uncover weeks of abuse, fear, and unimaginable cruelty. It would reveal how a young woman disappeared into a world where violence had become normal and where nobody stepped in until it was far too late. This is the story of Fan Man-yee. In the late 1990s, Hong Kong was a city of contrasts. Bright neon signs illuminated crowded streets. Restaurants stayed open deep into the night. Tourists filled shopping districts, and the city seemed alive around the clock. But beneath that energy existed another world, a world of addiction, organized crime, and vulnerable people struggling to survive. Fan Man-yee knew that world well. Her life had been marked by hardship from an early age. Growing up without stability or support, she faced challenges that many people could hardly imagine. As she grew older, she became involved in Hong Kong's nightlife scene, taking whatever work she could find to survive. Life was never easy, yet despite her circumstances, Fan wanted something better. When she became a mother, she reportedly tried to change direction. She hoped to leave some of her old struggles behind and build a safer future for herself and her child. For a moment, it seemed possible. Then a dispute over money changed everything. A customer accused Fan of taking cash that didn't belong to her. Although the amount was relatively small, the situation quickly escalated. The accusation became demands. The demands became threats. Fan believed she could resolve the problem. She was wrong. The people pressuring her were connected to criminal circles where respect, reputation, and intimidation often mattered more than the truth. Fan had no way of knowing that her life was about to take a devastating turn. On the evening of March 17, 1999, there was a knock at her door. Within hours, she would vanish. Several individuals forced Fan from her home and took her to an apartment in Hong Kong's Tsim Sha Tsui district. At first, they demanded money. When it became clear she could not pay, the situation grew darker. What began as punishment slowly transformed into something far more disturbing. Inside the apartment, Fan was trapped. Days turned into weeks. Every attempt to resist was met with violence. Every day brought new humiliation. The people holding her captive appeared to view her suffering as entertainment rather than punishment. The original dispute became almost meaningless. The abuse continued not because they wanted repayment, but because cruelty itself had become the point. The apartment became a place ruled by fear. Meanwhile, outside those walls, life carried on as normal. People laughed with friends. Shoppers crowded the streets. Taxis moved through the city late into the night. Only a few feet away from ordinary life, a nightmare was unfolding. As the weeks passed, Fan's condition deteriorated. The repeated abuse took a devastating physical and emotional toll. She grew weaker with each passing day. Hope slowly disappeared. By mid-April, she had endured more than a month of captivity. Then, sometime between April 14th and April 15th, 1999, Fan Man-yee died. No one called for help. No one contacted emergency services. No one attempted to save her. Instead, the people responsible focused on protecting themselves. What happened next would ensure the case would never be forgotten. In an attempt to conceal the crime, Fan's body was dismembered, evidence was destroyed, remains were discarded, and in a decision that would horrify an entire city, her skull was hidden inside a large Hello Kitty doll. Years later, that image would remain one of the most recognizable and disturbing symbols in Hong Kong criminal history. Yet for weeks, nobody knew what had happened inside the apartment. The truth might never have emerged if not for one unexpected person. Among those connected to the case was a teenage girl. She had become involved with the group and had witnessed much of what occurred. At first, she remained silent. But silence can become its own punishment. As days passed, she reportedly became overwhelmed by fear and guilt. The memories followed her everywhere. Sleep became difficult. Nightmares replaced rest. The images she carried refused to disappear. Eventually, she could no longer keep the secret. In May 1999, she walked into a police station and told officers a story so disturbing that some initially struggled to believe it. Her claims sounded impossible. A kidnapped woman, weeks of torture, human remains hidden inside a toy. Yet, investigators followed up on her information when officers entered the apartment. They quickly realized the teenager had been telling the truth. Evidence of prolonged abuse was everywhere. Human remains were recovered. Investigators began piecing together what had happened inside the apartment during the previous month. As details emerged, public shock turned into outrage. News reports spread rapidly across Hong Kong. Many people found it difficult to comprehend the level of cruelty involved. Police moved quickly. Suspects connected to the case were identified and arrested. The investigation soon led to one of the most closely watched criminal trials in Hong Kong history. When proceedings began, the courtroom heard testimony describing weeks of captivity and abuse. Witness statements painted a disturbing picture of life inside the apartment. Reporters covering the case later described the evidence as some of the most difficult they had ever encountered. To many observers, the outcome seemed obvious, but prosecutors faced a significant challenge. Although there was extensive evidence of abuse, proving exactly how Fan died was more complicated. The condition of the remains made it difficult to establish a precise cause of death. As a result, one crucial question dominated the trial. Did the defendants intend to kill her? The answer would determine whether they were convicted of murder or a lesser offense. After hearing the evidence, the jury reached its decision. The defendants were found guilty of manslaughter rather than murder. All received life sentences. The verdict immediately sparked controversy. Many members of the public felt justice had not gone far enough. For them, the distinction between murder and manslaughter seemed impossible to accept, given the suffering Fan had endured. Debate continued long after the trial ended. More than 25 years later, the case remains deeply embedded in Hong Kong's collective memory. People still remember the shocking discovery. They remember the investigation. They remember the trial. But perhaps the most important thing to remember is the victim herself. Behind every headline was a real person. A young woman who struggled through difficult circumstances. A mother who hoped for a better future. Someone whose life mattered. The Hello Kitty murder became famous because of its shocking details. Yet the deeper tragedy lies elsewhere. It is a story about vulnerability. It is a story about exploitation. It is a story about what can happen when people living on the margins of society are ignored. Fan Man-yee did not become a headline overnight. Long before the crime, there were warning signs, there were hardships, there were dangers, there were opportunities for someone to help. Instead, those opportunities passed by unnoticed, and by the time the world finally paid attention, it was already too late. Thank you for joining me on Dark Confession. If you found this case informative, consider subscribing for more true crime stories, unsolved mysteries, and disturbing cases from around the world. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and remember, some secrets should have stayed buried.